Hi friends, welcome to week 2 of the Elate Quilt Along. This week I thought we would talk about fabric and specifically about our fabric selection. Since we are at the very beginning of our project, it's a magical time when you can start with a clean slate. So anything is possible. We'll start with mine and then we will kind of talk about yours and then we will talk about mine again. I know that I mentioned some fabric ideas last week, but I'm suddenly feeling a little bit compelled in a different direction, or at least my fabric pull is growing. So I mentioned last week that fabric pulls for me can kind of be a little bit of a squirrel moment as different things can catch my eye. I have had a couple of events lately, and with that, my studio has been a bit turned up, and I noticed this panel. It is a Renoir panel, and I don't know why I have it or what I wanted to do with it, but it's beautiful and I kind of think it will be fun in this project. So it is here and we might be working with it. I think that sometimes for quilt-alongs, I'm feeling free to go a little bit wild. I love designing fabric and I love sewing with my fabric. It's in projects like this that I can think outside the box and push myself a little bit. And I can also include things that might be a bit off track. I love a hidden gem or something that feels like it doesn't belong. Now let's talk about you. I am loving your questions and comments. It's making it feel like we are collaborating on this in a way, and I love that. So I had a comment and a question about that fourth Elate quilt that I showed you last week, the one that I made as a wedding gift. You loved the fabric and you wanted to know if I had a kit. I don't have a kit, or I didn't, but it got me thinking. I sometimes sell fabric, but that's mostly at QuiltCon. It's just easiest for me to sell it there, but I have been able to do some fun things here and there in my web store, and I thought that this could be a fun thing to do. I decided to pull a small kit that is in the vein of the Garden Elate quilt that I made. It has some of the exact same garden greens that were used in the first one, but I also included some others from Memento and my previous collections. And of course, as I pulled that one, I couldn't help but pull a second grouping of fabrics as well. I wanted to try out a different color direction with this other one. This one has warmer shades with brown and orange. There's warm lavender, there's some pretty blues, and then yellow. The punches of yellow were really how I wanted to finish this palette out. I feel like it gives it the right character and personality. I have a small number of these two bundles available in the shop. As I pulled them, I thought it was a perfect way to talk about pulling fabric for our projects. First, it's literally a start for those of you interested in buying one of these. There are 10 fat quarters in each bundle, which is exactly what you need for the smallest quilt size. So if you wanted to make something bigger, you could either get 2 or you could use this as your starting point and then build out from there. If you like the Garden Elate quilt that I made, then you could personalize this direction by adding florals that you like. You could add some solids, you could add in something from your stash that you think suits it. You could also put these two bundles together. I built them this way to show you how your selections can grow and expand. What I like about these choices for this project is that they include a variety of pieces. There are smaller textural pieces, there are bright pieces, there are larger print pieces, and there's something about a larger scale print cutting it up in this project that I absolutely love. Let's go back to what I will make. First, you should know that I have cutoffs from each of the bundle fabrics. The things I pulled as ideas for you are things I might be using too. I have this panel, like I said. I love a surprise piece and I love cutting up a big print for this project. I was also at the fabric store this week. I saw some of my fabrics. Yay, it's so exciting to see them in the store. And I also picked up these fun fat quarters that I like. Since they are fresh additions to my studio, they are contenders for this quilt as well. There are some really fun prints to play with if I want. And then there's also this orangey red print that might be nice with the orangey red solids pile that I pulled last week. Like I said, this is a magical time in a project when everything is ahead for us and we will find our way forward with what we have and what is appealing most to us. Does that sound good to you? As a practical matter, I spent this week mostly pulling fabric. So I'll spend next week cutting and sewing some blocks together. If you'd like to take some time with your fabric this week, I encourage that. You'll see more of the cutting action in next week's dispatch. As a tip and thoughts for those of you ready to start cutting, I see this as 2 routes. You can cut everything out all at once and then sew it together, or you can cut, sew, and lay out as you go. When I'm going wild and free like I am here, I'm in the second camp. When I made my 2-color quilt, I was in the first camp. Let's get to your questions. My fat quarters are only 21 inches wide. Any tips for cutting out these C blocks? So 21 inches will actually be fine. That should work. If you follow the cutting instructions for the fat quarters, it will yield the same amount. So even missing that inch, you should be fine. No worries there. Of course, you can always get a little more fabric if you want to give yourself a little bit more wiggle room. This is kind of related and worth mentioning. Since I'm now with Ruby Star, designing with Ruby Star, they have these really fun selvages that can take up a little bit of extra space in the fabric. I love this. I love using this little extra bit when I can. I think it's a fun detail to work in, and I love that variety. So if you're seeing that as missing some fabric, you could also look at it as an opportunity to add variety to your project. Okay, next question. Related to fabric size, will this pattern work with a layer cake, which is 10 inches squared, or does it need to be fat quarters or yardage? You can use a layer cake. I don't know how far one layer cake will get you, but you can definitely use it. I would use the scrap approach when you start to cut out your fabrics. I love making things work when I can, and I think this could work for you. So can't wait to see. Good luck. This will be the second quilt I've made, and I am trying to decide which size to make. How did you choose the sizes to include in your pattern? I love this question. I don't talk about quilt sizes and which ones I include in a pattern very often, but it's a good question. In general, I try to cover as many bases as makes sense for the project. It's always nice to have a small size, whether that is a baby quilt or a wall hanging type of project. Throw sizes are kind of my personal favorite a lot of the time, so there's usually always something in that range. And then it is good to include a bed size if it makes sense. Elate has 4 different sizes. I have made the medium and large sizes. I love both of these sizes, and that's what I'll be shooting for myself. It might be a medium, but it could be a large. It just depends on the blocks that I'm making and when I use up the fabrics that I want to use, when I decide to stop. I think that's a good thing to think about for you. But you said this is your second quilt, so congratulations. That's so exciting. If you want to keep it small, the smaller sizes are always much more manageable in a lot of ways. You could do that, or if you wanted to maybe level up with this project, you could try the medium. I have made mostly mediums. I think they are kind of perfect. You can use a lot of different fabrics, and you'll end up with something that is a good throw size, but it's also not as big as the other 2 sizes. The fat quarter cutting instructions for Elate seem to indicate that you would not be repeating fabric between A, B, and C blocks. But in your pictured quilt, it looks like you do have overlap. Am I understanding this correctly? That is a very good question. Yes. I try to push boundaries when I can. That's the short answer. The longer answer is that you can share strips between A and B blocks, which is mostly where I did this. The cover quilt for the pattern is the version that I made out of the Memento fat quarters. So it is strictly made from the fat quarter bundle. So if you look at it closely, you could kind of see where I did this, where I did some of these swaps. A and B can swap and share sometimes. C blocks are really the ones that have to keep to themselves. I'll say too that when I had extra sewn units, I liked pairing them with other blocks to further break things up, if that makes any sense. I think that as you start cutting and pairing things together, it'll make more sense where you have the wiggle room. Or of course, you could always buy extra fat quarters so that you can use the same fabrics for different block styles, which I love that because then it kind of confuses the geometry a little bit. It blurs it together. If I make an Elate quilt from my scrap stash, should I concentrate on lining up lights with darks for each block? Just looking for a direction on using up my scraps for this quilt. I love this. It's always kind of a balance, right? So when your fabrics have good contrast, there is clarity within the block, and then there's also clarity within the design. But when there isn't a lot of contrast, it is more subtle, and it can also get muddy. Personally, I like pushing the boundaries and playing with these ideas. This is the case when your design wall is going to be your best friend. So if we look at my Scrappy Elate project, I have areas of both. There are areas with clear lights and darks, and you can see the blocks. And there are also areas where the contrast is more subtle. So the shapes are softened and it reads more as color and texture. I like having both, and I like having them sort of balanced across the quilt. It's really just a matter of taste. So even looking at mine, maybe you don't like my softer areas, then you can nix that. Go only for higher contrast. But maybe you like the softness and would rather have more of it. I think that could be really lovely to have a very soft quilt with a low contrast. You could focus more on the prints and the colors and bring the overall balance down. I hope that's helpful, but basically focus on one fabric pairing at a time, sew it together, get it up on your design wall. If you like it, do more of that. If you like it but are getting bored, then you could change it up and try something else. I'm really excited for you. I think you will have a lot of fun. So that's it for this week. Let me know what you think. You can check out the links below for where to ask me questions, where to find the pattern, where to find the bundles that I have mentioned, and anything else. I am going to take some time this week to zhuzh up my sewing space, and looking at some older pictures, I realized I have not changed the quilts that are hanging behind my sewing machine. So I want to kind of freshen up my view as we kind of step into this new project. Hopefully by next week, I will be able to share that with you too. I think it all helps and it all makes a difference. I love you guys, and I will see you next week.